Hey everyone, welcome back to the neighborhood. Your friendly neighborhood reviewer here with a review of the fabled Moondrop Blessing 2, thanks in part to Apos Audio. And I do have an affiliate link with Apos, which I'll place in the description below. So if you're going to pick up the Blessing 2 or any other product that they sell, it really helps the channel out if you use my link below. But as always, no pressure, it's just there if you'd like to make use of it. But let's get back to the Blessing 2. This IEM has kind of built a reputation of sorts as being the gold standard of IEMs in this price range at around $300. But what do I think of it? It may not be what you expect or what you'll think. So let's get into it. So beginning with the build, initially I wasn't going to cover the build as there's a ton of other reviews out there on this thing, but honestly I think the build may actually determine if you'll want to pick up these or not, as it's a solid build, but it's not without its quirks or considerations. Also, we're going to take a bit of a different stance on this one and also consider how the build affects the sound. So the package here is decently nice. Some have criticized the accessories for not being appropriate for an IEM in this price range, but I'm not going to do that here. I find the case that these come with to be relatively nice, and it's not leather, but it's a nice gray leather looking like material, and it's also soft to the touch. The size of the case is about the size of a deck of cards, and it's about 2 decks thick or so. So it's nice, but a little on the large side. But these are also somewhat large IEMs. 2 pairs of silicone tips in large, medium, and small also come with my set, although the medium was on the large size and the small was on the small size. Out of the tips that came in the box, medium fit me best, but I preferred KZ's Starline tips for this set, as it limited its somewhat harsh character and enhanced its low end a bit, 2 outcomes that were necessary for me to enjoy this IEM. When I first received the Blessing 2, I spoke with some others, and they all said that I needed to use a smaller, wider board tip for maximum insertion to get it to sound right. But honestly, when I did this, it just made the Blessing 2 sound colder and harsher to my ears. Many have also criticized the cable that the Blessing 2 comes with. They say that it's cheap and it kinks easily, but this was not my experience with it. It was soft and easy to work with for me, and it was pretty much the same cable that I tested with the Moondrop Starfield, just a copper color variant rather than a navy blue one. The connectors could have been a bit better on the cable as they were plastic, but I liked that it used lightweight 2-pin connectors and a smaller sized right-angled 3.5mm termination. The shell itself is rugged and composed of a thick clear resin material within a fixed metal faceplate. The drivers encased within consist of dual soft ears balanced armatures for the mid frequencies, dual nose balanced armatures for the high frequencies, and a 10mm paper cone diaphragm for the bass. Each cluster of drivers by frequency had its own individualized sound tube that delivered the sound through distinct holes in the otherwise solid nozzle. I should also mention that there seems to be a vent hole that releases through the bottom front of the faceplate as well. And as I suspect, this is where the Blessing 2's difficulties will arise for some, with its tube array and vented design in mind. The first issue with the tubes is that they are sized differently, which normally wouldn't be an issue, as I'm assuming this was done for tuning purposes. But in this case in particular, the sizes of the tubes do come across somewhat awkwardly in the sound, resulting in an unfortunate tuning to my ears. For example, the treble tube is smaller than the mid tube, and the bass tube is the smallest of them all. This comes across in the sound, as you get less presence from each tube as they go down in size. Furthermore, the bass tube is vented, as the others may be as well. It's kind of hard to tell, but this restricts the bass driver's dynamics and seems to result in a somewhat limited bass reproduction. What I'm trying to say is that the Blessing 2's sound profile isn't my favorite, as it has some flaws to my ears. And further, these flaws seem to be a direct result of its design. For example, the smallest tube, utilized by the treble-focused balanced armatures, results in a somewhat overly crispy and somewhat artificial sounding treble that lacks air. So air quantity is limited and air quality is somewhat impoverished. I can't help but think perhaps if they would have opened up the tube a bit more, things would have sounded much more natural. Further, the largest tubing utilized by the mid-range drivers resulted in the Blessing 2's somewhat mid-centric presentation. But this presentation could be somewhat harsh at times in the top end of the mid-range. Furthermore, the harshness could extend into the lower end of the treble, resulting in the mids displaying a slightly overly push-forward character. Vocals were also weighted thinner than I would like. Additionally, because of the restricted dynamics which we've already touched on, the lower portion of the mid-range appeared to be somewhat thin to my ears. Yet others have said that the dusk, which is supposed to have an additional low-end presence, but not necessarily dynamics, is even leaner in this area. So I'm not entirely sure what's going on here. And it may sound like I'm being overly unsympathetic regarding the Blessing 2, but honestly, after others have trumped up this set as the go-to de facto recommendation in the price range, I was a bit disappointed to say the least, and honestly, I expected much more. I was let down by some of the areas of its performance, really. Tonality here was cold, just overly bright leaning to my ears, and stark in its character. As I already alluded to, note thickness is somewhat lean in general. There's also some mild sibilance at times on certain tracks. In my eyes, the Blessing 2 lacks musicality, dynamics, and emotional impact. This may kind of sound out of left field to say, but they kind of sound like if I imagined listening to music while camping out in a cave on my way to see the Night King from Game of Thrones. In other words, I don't find them fun to listen to. But let's try and have a little bit of fun with this review, alright? Having said that, resolution, detail, and clarity are better than expected for the price range. Imaging competencies of the Blessing 2 are also top-notch, and decay capabilities are great. Tracking was on point from right to left, and instrument placement within the stage was very natural. If anything suffered with regard to imaging, it was instrument distinction, as the tonal properties made it difficult to distinguish between instruments on occasion, although instruments were distinctive within its space. Speaking of the stage, although people have criticized the Blessing 2 stage at times, I actually found this component of the sound profile to be rather natural and wide enough, without any stretching or smearing of sonics. While not the most 3D presentation in terms of depth of the audio field was above average as well, and I'd say that the Blessing 2 was more than competent for its price in this regard too. So for me, the Blessing 2 is a bit of a mixed bag. It's built well from a durability perspective, but its package may be viewed by some as not being up to snuff for an IEM of this price. And I really didn't talk about the fit too much, because these surprisingly fit me fine. From other reviews, I was concerned, and they are a bit on the chunky side, but they fit my ears better than I expected and were comfortable too. Nevertheless, I also did not enjoy its sound profile, even though I did find it to be technically competent. Unlike other reviewers, I don't really recommend smaller, wider, open board tips, and instead like the stocks or KZ Starline ear tips the best, as a deeper insertion exacerbated its already harsh, cold, and slightly artificial tonality. In general, I found the Blessing 2 to be a bit too lean, sterile, overly crispy, lacking in musicality, and comparatively underwhelming in its dynamics. But is it a bad IEM? No, but it's also not going to be a de facto recommendation from this reviewer, as it simply was not an enjoyable experience for me to listen to. But hey, a lot of other reviewers seem to like these, so your mileage may vary. But thanks again to Appos for sending in the Blessing 2 for an honest review. I'll post my affiliate link in the description below in case you're still interested in picking up the Blessing 2, or perhaps you want to pick up something else like the Tantrum Hannah instead. I just reviewed the Hannah, and I find it to be a much more musical, enjoyable set. And don't forget to like and subscribe here on YouTube, follow the channel on Instagram, Twitter, at the blog, become a member of the Discord, or become a Patreon. The Patreon is only $1.50 a month, and it gets you access to early written reviews like these. This review had been up on the Patreon for a number of weeks before I got around to making this video, so there's a bunch of content up there as I've been reviewing a lot of different products. So make sure to check it out if you can. But as always, I appreciate all of my audience, and thank you for tuning in. And with that, I'm out for now.